co-host. Who knows whether Bridget's going to be with us today or not. I know she got another hunting tag, so
space to. So when I got the link from Bridget, I was like, yes. So if you guys don't mind, repost the space. Colonel Town is going to get started.
whatever. All right. So this is an article that I've been saving, and I'm glad I can do it now so that I can close the tab finally. I leave these open on my computer because they are definitely things that I want to get to. This article called The U.S. Empire, the CIA, and the NGOs, I thought was kind of perfect timing, actually, since Warhamster and I are going to get into the NGOs. It doesn't go in depth into them, so I'm not like spilling the beans early. It is written by F. William Ingdahl, and it's an interview, and I'm going to let you know when I'm reading the questions from the interviewer, as opposed to his response. So he starts off the article with the CIA recruited the Muslim Brotherhood to fight a proxy war against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, which we've talked about, which led to the withdrawal of the Soviets from the Hindu Kush area. Since then, the CIA used the mercenaries to fight more proxy wars in the Balkans, Chechnya, and Azerbaijan. Due to the wars of aggression against Iraq, Libya, Syria, and Yemen, the U.S. and its vassal states created sectarian violence that led to civil wars. Right now, the CIA and the Muslim Brotherhood are present in the form of ISIS in Syria and Iraq. So this interview focuses on F. William Ingdahl's latest book that was written in German called The Secret Files NGOs. It was conducted by Mr. Ludwig Watzel, who is a journalist in Bonn, Germany. So I'll read his questions to Mr. Ingdahl. His first question: I guess we could agree upon the fact that the CIA is the world's worst terror organization. After World War II, hardly any coup d'etat or organized uprising happened without the helping hand of the CIA. As I understood your book, in the last 25 years, the CIA got quite a few so-called little helpers in the form of NGOs. Could you please elaborate on that? Mr. Ingdahl says, response: during the Reagan administration, very damaging scandals were becoming public about the CIA's dirty operations around the world. Chile, Iran, Guatemala, the top secret MK Ultra project, those actually got exposed in the 70s. But Reagan was the next president after that. The student movements during the Vietnam, just to name a few. To take the spotlight away from them, CIA Director Bill Casey proposed to Reagan creating a private NGO, a kind of a cutout that would pose as private, but in reality, as one of its founders, the late Alan Weinstein, said in a later interview to the Washington Post, quote, doing what the CIA did privately, unquote. This was the creation of the NGO called the National Endowment for Democracy in 1983. Soon, other Washington-steered NGOs were added, like the Freedom House or the Soros Open Society Foundation, the U.S. Institute of Peace, and so forth. Again, we've covered them all. The money was often channeled via USAID of the State Department to hide its origin. Every major regime attack by the US government since then, including the Solidarność in Poland, the Yeltsin CIA-backed Russian coup, the 2004 Ukraine Orange Revolution, the 2008 Tibet riots, the Arab Spring of 2011 to today, all have been done by this group of very select, quote-unquote, democracy NGOs. Little wonder that countries like Russia and China or Hungary act to ban these undesirable NGOs. The journalist then asked him, you quote Alan Weinstein's co-author of the founding of the NGOs, National Endowment for Democracy, saying, quote, much of what we do today was done 25 years ago by the CIA, unquote. Are the US NGOs such as NED, the Institute of Peace, USAID, the National Democrat Institution, which is part of NED, not to speak of the Soros Network, the fifth column of the CIA? Mr. Wardog says, yes, as I indicated above, I would say so in my opinion. Inevitably, their NGO agenda fits the given agenda of Washington's foreign policy. Coincidence? I don't believe so. The journalist then asked him, your critics focus mainly on a few US NGOs, or would you include all governmental organizations in general? Aren't these all NGOs driven by good mind and noble deeds to spread democracy and freedom in the world? His response, this is the devil in the concept of Bill Casey, hiding very black, dirty, anti-democratic CIA operations behind private political NGOs waving the banner of human rights has been very effective for Washington's global agenda of toppling uncooperative regimes around the world. In effect, the CIA has weaponized human rights. Curiously, useful regimes for Washington, such as Saudi Arabia, go unbothered by calls for democracy. Their oil billions finance Washington's global terrorism agenda. Take the recent case of the fake democracy white helmet NGOs in Syria, doing propaganda in intimate cooperation with ISIS to justify the US-led war against the Assad government. White helmets get money reportedly from the Soros Foundation, from the US and UK governments, and were created by the former British Army intelligence officer James LeMassory. Their atrocity videos have repeatedly been exposed as fake, staged by actors. Their alleged sarin gas video showing unprotected white helmets first responders handling alleged sarin gas victims with no hazmat protection is a joke. A fake was just exposed widely after a number of hazmat. It was exposed as a joke, a fake, by a number of hazmat sarin gas experts. The Washington, or EU in some cases, political NGOs are effective because they can attract many innocent, good-willed people. I recently received a very touching personal letter from a European medical doctor who had spent 18 months working in a humanitarian effort with the Doctors Without Borders in the South Sudan before their US-backed independence. She was so grateful after reading my NGO book, as she could understand all the seemingly irrational directions their American Doctors Without Border leaders gave the staff. She quit because of burnout and now said she understands why. Honest doctors were being used by Washington for secret political agendas. South Sudan was targeted because China was receiving a major share of their oil. Of course, not all NGOs are doing the work of the CIA. I focus on the ones with a hidden political agenda, who, as I described in the book, have weaponized human rights and the word democracy for devious ends. The journalist then asked him, in 1984, the hedge fund billionaire George Soros established in Budapest the Soros Foundation. His first target was Poland. John Paul II and U.S. President Ronald Reagan met in 1982 at the Vatican to discuss the destabilization of the communist bloc. In this endeavor, has there also been an involvement of the Soros Foundation? The answer: the Soros Foundation established the Stefan Batory Foundation in Warsaw in 1988 to train activists to ultimately topple the communist regime. They played a major role building democracy into Poland to push privatization of state enterprises. They created hyperinflation and open choice public state assets for auction to Western investors like friends of Soros's for pennies on the dollar. That's another pattern. The next question. The 2 chapters on the plundering of the former Soviet Union by the CIA, Soros, and his Harvard boys, in cooperation with the Yeltsin clan and former KGB officials, is quite shocking. Please elaborate. It sounds like a mafia undertaking. The author responds, I have to refer readers to the book as the treatment has been cross-checked and is exhaustive. In brief, the CIA, under the direction of then George H.W. Bush, Mr. CIA himself, managed to corrupt several high-ranking KGB generals who recruited a network of young Communist Union of Youth proteges such as Boris Berezovsky and Mikhail Khodorkovsky to become their hand-picked oligarchs to plunder the state assets for pennies compared to their true worth. This is the infamous voucher scandal that valued the entire state assets, including oil and gas, machine-making companies, high tech, all for $16 billion when they were actually worth trillions. They literally raped Russia for personal gain, and the CIA and its network of Western banks, such as Riggs Bank in Washington, allowed them to launder money out of Russia. Even I was shocked to verify the details. It was criminal. Yeltsin was their boy. Some said so long as he was supplied a good supply. The interesting point to note is that George H.W. Bush, the former director of the CIA, ordered 3 simultaneous NGO destabilizations in the same year, 1989. The 3 were Russia, China in Tiananmen Square, and Yugoslavia. The book documents this in great detail. The journalist then asked him, after Vladimir Putin succeeded Boris Yeltsin as Russia's president, he immediately stopped the robbing of Russia. Do you think that could be one of the causes why the political class in Washington hates and demonizes him so much? The author responds, Putin came from a Russian nationalist faction, as opposed to what they call cosmopolitan or international faction of the KGB and its successor. They knew they had to act with stealth until their grip was secure in 2000, when Yeltsin was forced to quietly retire or face revelations, and Yeltsin was convinced to name Putin acting president. There has been an undeclared war against a stable nation state in Russia since. The founder of Stratfor, George Friedman, one of the better informed American analysts of geopolitics and former consultant to the Pentagon and CIA, among others, recently gave an interview after the CIA Ukraine coup, which Friedman called the most blatant coup in U.S. history. That, if you recall, was the one where Victoria Nuland, as U.S. Assistant Secretary of State, went to Kiev and handed out cookies. He said candy bars, but it was cookies, to the protesters in Maidan Square, and telephoned her contempt for the EU to the U.S. ambassador in Kiev. Freeman noted what I have documented in various books, such as, and then he gives the name of his book in German, that the foreign policy of the U.S. of America for at least the past century, as the U.S. emerged on the decline of the British Empire, the U.S. foreign policy priority has been to prevent at all costs the merging of economic interest and cooperation between Germany and Russia. The world has undergone 2 world wars because of this unfortunate geopolitical dogma of U.S. policy, a dogma taken over by the British and from the father of British geopolitics, Sir Halford Mackinder. Washington hates and demonizes Putin for the reason he has moved deliberately to stabilize Russia as a great nation, which it truly is, as I can attest from almost 25 years of personal experience. And as a result of Washington's demonization, Putin's influence in the world grows stronger, first with China, then with Eurasian nations, Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and even the Philippines and Latin America. The world is becoming fed up with the endless agenda of covert and overt U.S. wars everywhere. We need to look closely behind Trump's words, and very soon we find that we hope not to find the oligarchs behind him. The journalist then says the dismantling of Yugoslavia was a catastrophe. The Germans, under the chancellorship of Schroeder and his infamous foreign minister, Fischer, joined forces with Clinton to overthrow the Serbian president, Milosevic. In this coup-like operation, were there NGOs involved? And what was their strategy? The author says, yes. Follow the subsequent career of Mr. Fischer. A street thug from the 1968 Frankfurt protests becomes crowned by the USA and its mainstream media as a statesman, apparently the reward for delivering the Green Party vote for bombing Yugoslavia in 1999. After office, Fischer got an honorary teaching post at my alma mater, Princeton, after George Soros invites Mr. Fischer on his new European Council of Foreign Relations think tank. In terms of toppling Milosevic, the U.S. government and its select NGOs, including NED and the Soros Foundation, organized, financed, and trained key student leaders and others in a successful coup under the name Outpour Resistance. And remember, we just covered them in our book on the coup on Venezuela. They used that same prototype. They also had a logo of the clenched fist. Serbian translations of James Sharp, and we know who he is. He's the guy that runs the he died, Albert Einstein Institute. His writings on nonviolent action were used, and the key leaders were personally trained by Sharp's associate, U.S. Army Colonel Robert Helvey, in secret meetings placed to avoid police observation. Outpour got, by some estimates, as much as $30 million from U.S. government-linked organizations such as NED, their Republican element, IRI, and USAID. The destruction of Yugoslavia was orchestrated since the 80s by Washington, first Bush Sr., then Clinton. The aim was to create a war in Europe to justify the continued presence of NATO after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Was hard to justify American taxpayers or even Europeans focusing on independence to support NATO. For Washington and the influential U.S. military-industrial complex, such independence is taboo. The second aim was to establish a huge U.S. presence later in Kosovo called Camp Bond Steel. The journalist then asked, when the Arab masses went into the streets in Cairo, Tripoli, etc., the Western media and political class were thrilled. Finally, democracy, freedom, and human rights found their way to the Arab world. Were these uprisings spontaneous or were they organized? The author responds, the entire Arab Spring was secretly planned and financed by Washington and U.S. financed NGOs. Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was a key figure, along with her bizarre Muslim Brotherhood assistants, Abedin. The RAND Corporation, which I've argued is a front for the CIA, was responsible for developing the technique of mob swarming like bees as a way of using Facebook and social media to steer protests, and they played a key role. The protest student groups in Egypt were U.S. trained, again, using Gene Sharp's processes. They were brought to Europe and secretly trained by those used in Serbia. In the case of Libya's Gaddafi, a more urgent regime change was deemed necessary, as now famous DC leaks and WikiLeaks emails of Hillary to her private advisor, Sidney Blumenthal, reveal. Gaddafi, who, contrary to his demonized image, had built up Libya with a high standard of living, the highest in all of Africa, was about to unveil the creation of alliance of central banks and introduce the gold dinar currency for oil sales, not US dollars. He was doing so together with Tunisia and Mubarak in Egypt. As Hillary wrote to Blumenthal, that had to be blocked by whatever means necessary. The means to block were the illegal bombing of Libya and the assassination of Gaddafi and turning Libya into a field of rubble. The original Pentagon CIA State Department plan called for the immediate toppling of another thorn in Washington's side immediately after Gaddafi. That was Assad in Syria. That's not worked out well for the Washington planners, and a great human tragedy unnecessarily has grown out of a 6-year attempt. The journalist then asked, in the old days, the conquerors brought in its wake the missionaries. Today, the Western neo-colonial powers come with hundreds of NGOs who teach the indigenous population how Western democracy is supposed to function. Do you think the NGOs serve the interest of these people? What about the German NGOs, who especially carry a lot of ideological ballast, for example, in the form of gender mainstreaming with them? What do you make of that? The author says, I think your analogy to the Christian missionaries of the past and the human rights or democracy NGOs of today is very fitting. I'm not competent to comment on the activities of various German NGOs. My main focus is Washington, the hegemonic power today and the source of so much destructive mass, unfortunately. The author says, or the journalist then asks, at the beginning and at the end of your book, you refer to George Orwell's doublethink. That means war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Do we live in times where the original meaning of words become different? Do the U.S. empire and its vassal states wage war in the name of democracy and destroy the nation states with the same democratic rhetoric? The author says, this is why I found Orwell's quote so appropriate. His book, 1984, in many ways is a description of what has been allowed to happen in our Western democracies, especially in Britain and the U.S. The journalist then asked, if you could give the NGOs a piece of advice, what would you tell them? He responds, for the honest person who may have got caught up in the nice rhetoric about values, human rights, and such, I would suggest looking more closely at the money trail feeding your NGO. For the Ned or Soros foundations, I would suggest they would all do mankind a favor by shutting their doors permanently. that you allow nations and individuals to decide their own sovereign without your unwanted meddling. I would also paraphrase Cromwell to the British Long Parliament. Quote, you human rights NGOs, go. You have sat too long here for any good you have been doing. Depart, I say, and let us be done with you. In the name of God, go. Unquote. And that's the end of the article. So I think it's very fitting because it concisely consolidates all of what we've been revealing here for the last 3 years. Any comment?
All I can say is wow, wow, and wow.
So, just in case you guys haven't been here the last couple of days, we do have dinner plans. So I'm going to be off of here around 5 to 5:15 at the latest. But I did want to open it up for you guys' comments. SR, did you have anything?
Oh, thank you, Colonel, and thank everyone for attending today. News articles and now an interview. How does it get any better? Anyway, I was doing some looking up some stuff about Sir Halford John Mackinder, father of modern geopolitics. This guy was all over the place concerning. He was in politics and diplomacy. He was in exploration. He was the one that came up with the heartland theory. I was into.
Well, and the critical link there is him going around looking for the resources and then being behind the apparatus that goes in and conquers those resources via the political element of it. And so he fits the very definition of the Praetorian Guard operating under the guise of political positions to secure resources for the international syndicate. He is part and parcel of that entire operation, as you just described.
Right. He actually founded the Oxford School of Geography in 1899.
Of course he did.
Director of London School of Economics from 1903 to 1908.
Yes, and that's where we send people to indoctrinate them into this crowd from the United States to Oxford, the Rhodes Scholar. They're literally inseparable. So it's really crazy. And to me, the most fascinating part of all of this is just how naive the American public is. How do you have a non-governmental organization that's funded almost exclusively by the government? How's that possible? And that obviously was part and parcel of closing USAID. We've yet to close National Endowment for Democracy, which we need to do tomorrow or yesterday. But they're literally an oxymoron. If you're using my money, you're not independent. And of course, that was just decided by the Supreme Court. If it's being funded by taxpayer dollars, it is by definition under the executive branch and has no independence at all. And what no one points out then is going back, now that we know 100% that they were under the jurisdiction of the executive branch all along, while touting themselves as being quote unquote independent, then every action that they funded was done so under the direction or the approval of the United States government, because they did not ever operate independently. And to me, that's critical, because we have tied the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, and their Office of Transition Initiatives and their Office of Public Safety to all of these coups throughout post-World War II. They were never non-governmental organizations. They were never independent. They were an element used to fund regime change with our taxpayer dollars. And in the case of National Endowment for Democracy, with the International Republican Institute and the National Democratic Institute, they had sitting politicians. The entire board of the IRI ran for 25 years, most of its existence, by John McCain, had senators and House of Representative members sitting on it, literally funding regime change as politicians. Go ahead, SR.
We talk about this, and if everybody remembers, this was Obama's big push, public-private partnerships. And I looked at that and I said, what's really going on is we're sitting here and saying the public is still paying a private industry to do work on behalf of the government. So my answer to that was I didn't care for public-private partnerships because I didn't want my taxpayer dollars going wherever he thought they should.
Right.
But
right. But it also allows other foundations that we've talked about, like the Carnegie, Rockefeller, to launder their money, which never has to be disclosed, into these organizations to steer them into countries that they're going to ultimately benefit from. That's the beauty of these quote unquote governmental, non-governmental organizations. And you see that happening. We've talked about it. And you know good and well that these foundations that are ran by the industrialist members of the international syndicate are not going to be spending their money when it doesn't ultimately benefit them. And so when they can use $1 of their money and $9 of taxpayer money to go in and do the work for them, to go in and, as the author accurately articulates, pick up assets for pennies on the dollar after the destruction of these regime change occurs, you can see how it easily is exploited. And again, it's our taxpayer dollars. We don't get the profits from overthrowing governments. They do. And that, to me, is the biggest piece that most people miss. It's the same thing when we talked about all of the operations with the kind of the chart that I drew of how the international syndicate had their own private intelligence and military, then they offloaded into the federal government. And then after 9/11, the explosion of private military and private intelligence, who all get bought up by the same oligarchs. And so now they're profiting off of our taxpayer dollars, funding the private military and intelligence via contract, and they reap all of the rewards. This is exactly the same thing. Everything goes, our taxpayer dollars are being used to generate profits for them. We are literally their tax slaves. And it has to stop. I see where.
I agree 100%, Colonel, because all we're talking about here is a federal employee by proxy.
I see War Hamster.
Howdy, everyone.
Hey.
I stopped by before I have to head out for dinner. Enjoyed the show today.
Me too.
Why I'm such a rigid original intent constitutionalist. You know, as Doug Gibbs and I are going through Madison's notes on the Philadelphia Convention, we're doing it line by line. We know what the founding fathers were debating. And one thing they were certain of is that this new federal government they were creating was not going to have the authority to do things like public-private or anything like that, despite the fact that people like Hamilton wanted, at all times, federally funded internal improvements. And that's where the slippery slope starts. Once the government starts paying private companies, to do build canals, what have you, it sounds like it's good for the public. Then they are forced to tax you. And the slippery slope, it just keeps getting the government incrementally, inch by inch, further and further left, meaning more and more government. And they just have no business whatsoever constitutionally to be involved in any of these things. And that's exactly, you've heard my theory on why why Lincoln fought the war of Northern aggression. It's on the Republican Party's 1860 platform. The number one thing they cared about was federally funded internal improvements, which is slang for crony capitalism.
And explain, because you do this so well, explain the difference between the privately funded railroads and the publicly funded ones.
Well, yeah, if you look at the Intercontinental Railroad, the famous one with Golden Spike that was federally funded, it does not go in straight lines. It zigzags from town to town. Well, the reason it does that is we have railroad lawyers like Abraham Lincoln that were going to each of these towns and taking bribes, because you make a lot of money in your town if the railroad goes through. And so it zigzags across the country. It ended up taking twice as long and cost 3 times as much to build it. Well, at the same time, there's another railroad that went almost as far as, I think it was Minneapolis to Seattle, that got done in under time and under budget because there was no government involvement whatsoever. So, government efficiency is obviously an oxymoron unless it comes to collecting taxes and killing people. And the government has anything they get involved in on a commercial scale is going to fail. It's going to have too many costs. You'll have, basically you have bureaucrats involved, which is permanent useless jobs. And now, since our government's gone so far down the socialist path, now you've got lifetime pensions for useless people whose job was never necessary in the first place.
I love it.
Yeah, and that's a slippery slope. That's how we got the robber barons who created these institutions, who then bought the politicians who created new laws to protect them. And the biggest sleight of hand of all time was from 1910 to 1913, where the Rockefellers and the Carnegies put their generational wealth behind what's called a tax-free foundation. And then 2 years later, they sent their bankers to Jekyll Island, and we got the federal income tax for ourselves. So for the last 112 years, we've been paying taxes for a government that turns around and kicks money back to these tax-free foundations and these NGOs that they create and control so they can go out there and make more money as multinational corporations in these countries around the world. And then our taxpayers pay for our military and our CIA to overthrow the governments that they don't like. It is the biggest sleight of hand of all time. And I might be getting a little pissed off, so I'll stop there.
You're on a roll. SR, go ahead.
I was thinking, as Warhamter's explaining this, the last huge private investment that I recall occurred in the 70s when the Alaskan pipeline was built. My understanding is the government didn't pay 1 red cent into that building of the pipeline, and it was done within a year.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing what the profit motive actually does for efficiency. When you actually have a bottom line, you actually have to pay attention to. The government doesn't have a bottom line; they got an endless pit of money.
Called us.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm from California. The railroad tracks to nowhere. That thing will never be finished. And it's like 5 times, maybe 8 times over budget.
The high-speed rail.
Yeah, it's never going to be built.
So what's interesting about that is the companies that were behind that tried relentlessly to sell that to Rick Scott when he was governor. And it went on for years. They wanted to build a high-speed rail between Tampa and Orlando. And anybody that has ever lived in Tampa and Orlando understand that while it would be great to have that, Tampa nor Orlando has the common conveyance that would allow that to work. Like, like a tube system, a subway system, or anything like that. So once you get dumped off in one of those two places, you're either going to have to Uber around or find a taxi or whatever. It was the dumbest idea ever. And Rick Scott was under tremendous pressure by the federal government to take the funds, but then it left the state of Florida on the hook for coming up with the rest of those funds. And he simply refused to do it. So all they did was turn around and take it out to California. And of course, they jumped on it lock, stock, and barrel. And everything that Rick Scott ever said about it came true. It's still not done.
Well, then you look at the fact that railroad is about 4 generations of modern modes of transportation in the past.
Yeah.
And there's not a single railroad in America that runs at a profit. So that they don't exist without a government subsidy. They could if they just did freight. But if they start getting the cargo and everything like that, and the fact is, they're so highly regulated, there's expenses there that they don't need to be. You want to build, better transportation in the state of Florida. What you do is you get the best contractors out there, have them put together a plan, see who can do it the most efficiently at the best cost. And then you have your politicians vote and say, okay, we can afford this amount of money for infrastructure, which is a legitimate state government expense. It is not a federal government expense by any stretch of the imagination.
Yep.
It never should have been. That is a huge difference between the two. But when you start, you get these politicians that, the ones we live with today, and, all the contractors, there's so much red tape just to be able to bid on a government contract. These contractors are paying bribes left and right. It's not clean business at all.
And I can attest to that. When, for the very short period of time that I was in business with my husband as an electrical contractor, just looking even at small jobs at MacDill or some of the other places, the amount of regulation that you have to go through to bid on those contracts absolutely screws every small contractor. The only people that can bid on that has the overhead to be able to comply with all of the rules and regulations are large contractors, and it's by design. It's a self-licking ice cream cone.
Yeah, and it's incestuous. People, it's family members and stuff like that, or friends of family, and then of course these are all the campaign donors. So who's going to get the bid every single time. So many problems with that, and the answer is so simple. Start with the federal government, limit it to its enumerated duties and nothing else. The states can handle the rest because the states are small enough for most of them. We can actually then have oversight. And what also happens there is there's less incentive for all these multinational corporations to pump bribes into the hands of these 1.5 national political parties. And you get more local representation, probably better representation.
Absolutely. Stellar, go ahead.
I wanted to out to Joe. He's an amazing truther just like you, and just wanted to say hello to him. Sorry. And hi, War Hamster. SR, go ahead. Those things from that article are totally, totally true of what's happening still today. And the same players are involved. And it's just disgusting that these parasites are around. And I'm so thankful that we're awake and enough to understand because of people like you and Alpha, War Hamster, Joe Rambo, a lot of you guys that have put so much time and effort sharing all that you've learned. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Stellar. And yes, I know, Joe. SR, go ahead.
I was just sitting here thinking about what's going on, Colonel, and what's happening in California with the high-speed rail. And putting on my Gladio glasses, something just occurred to me.
What's that?
It's not just the California government and what's going on and bleeding taxpayers. They're probably also paying the people who are hollering and screaming for climate purposes. We got to save the insects. We got to do this. We got to do that. Anything to milk as much as they can get out of it.
Well,
SR, let me address that. You know, and California is the worst, and I know it pretty well since I spent most of my adult life there. They got these things like the California Coastal Commission, the California Forestry Commission. These are little crony board positions, basically no show, where you're getting paid $300,000-$400,000 a year for this stuff, and you got to get your bribe through them as well before you can even mow one blade of grass. And you want to talk about getting every inch of grift out of it? They absolutely do. It's the wives of the politicians or a businessman who's, you know, a contractor. That's who sits on these commissions. And people don't pay attention to the people running these commissions when they vote. It's like a down ballot issue. But my God, you just enriched a family. I mean, we're talking, you serve for like 8 years. It's worth, you know, millions of dollars.
Newsom's wife, prime example. She's making millions off of the committees that she's sitting on.
Well,
exactly.
Utilities, within the utilities too. There's that one utility thing where there's, I think, 23 people, and they're making billions of dollars, and it's just being funneled through these wives. And like you said,
let me also add that Mayor Sarge, who's always dead on, over on Rumble says they are high-speed money laundering machines, and that's absolutely correct.
Well, even that high-speed rail that was supposed to come from whatever it was, Los Angeles to Vegas, they had a certain amount, but they've now doubled it, I believe. We just got notified in the last couple of weeks. So that one, you know, that train that's supposed to come in, whatever. But yeah, it got doubled or tripled.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just another way for them to launder money to themselves. Our money, by the way. Absolutely.
And Colonel, that's exactly why we should have stopped right away in 1787 with federally funded internal improvements. Hamilton proposed it on the floor of Philadelphia. The founding fathers shot it down. And then he turned around and got in as the Secretary of the Treasury because the richest man in Pennsylvania, Robert Morris, who funded a lot of the Revolutionary War, writes a letter to Washington, says, you need to get this Hamilton guy to be the Secretary of Treasury. And he was the only cabinet secretary until Jefferson came in as Sec-State. And he just instantly started putting together policies that are the exact opposite of what he, you know, should have got lost. The conversation about it in Philadelphia, and then, you know, everything he said in the Federalist Papers, he did the exact opposite. The reason he did that, Robert Morris, when Hamilton basically federalized the state debts, he basically had all these state bonds selling for 5 cents on the dollar. He said the federal government's going to make it whole because we want to have the debt for the government. Robert Morris made the equivalent of $400 million in a month by going out around the country and buying up all these states' Revolutionary War debt. And that's what Hamilton did. It was crony capitalism from day one.
Yep. Magadai over on Rumble says, I wish my clothes were as well laundered as our tax dollars. You guys are killing me. Okay. So if we don't have anything else, remember tomorrow's 4:00 show is canceled. And I will let you know as soon as I hear from Alpha on when our last night's show is rescheduled. It'll be sometime this weekend. And you guys aren't going to want to miss it. And also, I did want to mention the podcast that I will be on from the UAE next week. And it is not live. He does have a Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. And I will give you guys an update if anything happens over the weekend that I think is worth mentioning. So thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. Take care. God bless and have a wonderful weekend.
Are you going to be going up to Cocoa Beach?
I'm in Cocoa Beach.
Right on.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the SpaceX launched another Starlink uh, uh, last night that we got to see go up, because we're literally right down the street from Cape Canaveral, and we're sitting on Patrick Air Force Base. I do have a C-130 video that I want to upload of one taken off from here last night. They were doing nighttime touch and goes. And we've got the 93rd Rescue Squadron here, the PJs that go out and do search and rescue. They're all stationed here as well. So I love coming over to this base. It's a wonderful
enjoy. Give everyone a big hug from us.
I will definitely do that. And I am going to see Magadai. She's going to be coming down. So she's over in the Rumble chat, and I'm very excited to scheduled time, 4 o'clock on Monday. Take care. See you guys later.